I'm 62 years old, and 3 years ago I discovered my husband had been having an affair with a woman from our church. That's shocking enough. But here's the part that nearly destroyed me. Together, they'd secretly mortgaged our paid-off home, the house I'd spent 35 years working for, and gambled away over $200,000. By the time I found out, we were months away from losing everything. If you'd told me this could happen, I would have laughed. Not to us, not to me. I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew my friend. But I've learned the hard way that sometimes the people sleeping under your roof, the people sitting next to you in the church pew, are strangers wearing familiar faces. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My husband, I'll call him Richard, and I got married in 1985. I was 27, he was 29. We built what I thought was a good life in a small town in central Missouri, about 40 miles outside of Columbia. You know, the kind of place, population 5,000, one main street with a hardware store and a diner, Friday night football games. Everybody knows everybody's business. We raised 3 kids there. Richard worked his way up to regional manager at a farm supply company, and I kept the books for a local insurance agency run by a man who'd been insuring families in our county for 40 years. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. More than that, we were secure. And in 2005, when I was 47 years old, we made the last payment on our mortgage. I still remember that day. Richard brought home a bottle of champagne cheap stuff from the grocery store, but it tasted like victory. We stood in our backyard, looking at our little 3-bedroom ranch with the white siding and black shutters, and I felt this enormous sense of accomplishment. That house was ours. Completely ours. No bank could take it. We'd worked for it, sacrificed for it, and we owned it free and clear. That house represented more than just a place to live. It was our retirement security, our safety net, our kids' inheritance. I used to joke with Richard that even if everything else went wrong, at least we'd always have a roof over our heads. As it turned out, that wasn't even close to true. Now, I need to tell you about Susan. That's not her real name, but it'll do. Susan showed up at First Methodist Church sometime around 2005, right about when we paid off that house, actually. She was a few years younger than me, maybe 43 or 44, recently divorced, new to town. She didn't know anybody, and she had this air about her like a lost dog, if that makes sense. You just wanted to help her. I remember the first Sunday I really noticed her. It was after the service, and most folks were standing around the fellowship hall drinking bad coffee and eating store-bought cookies. Susan was sitting alone in a corner, holding a paper cup, watching everybody else talk and laugh. Something about the way she sat there just broke my heart. Nobody should have to be that alone. So I walked over and introduced myself. Within 10 minutes, I'd invited her to lunch with Richard and me at the Plaza Diner. That's the place on Main Street that's been there since the 1960 seconds. Red vinyl booths, and a waitress named Dottie who's been working there longer than I've been alive. Susan teared up when I invited her. She said nobody had been that kind to her since her divorce. That was the beginning. Over the next 15 years, Susan became part of our lives. Not family, exactly, but close. She'd come over for coffee 2 or 3 times a week. We'd walk together around Johnson Park, the one with the gazebo where the high school band plays on summer evenings. When my mama died in 2013 cancer, it took her fast. Susan was right there. She brought tuna casserole and potato salad. She sat with me at the funeral home when I was picking out the casket. She held my hand during the service. When you go through something like that with someone, you bond. You think you know them. Richard seemed to like her well enough. She'd join us for backyard cookouts when the kids came home to visit. Sometimes the 3 of us would drive over to Columbia to see a movie or have dinner somewhere nicer than the diner. It was easy, comfortable. I thought I'd found a real friend, the kind you make in middle age when you're wise enough to appreciate good people. Here's what I didn't know. What I couldn't have known. Susan was lying about almost everything. She'd told me her ex-husband had been controlling and financially abusive. She said he'd left her with nothing after the divorce, that she was starting over from scratch. I believed every word. I felt sorry for her. But the truth, and I didn't learn this until much later, was that Susan had gotten a decent settlement in her divorce. Nearly $150,000. But she'd blown through every penny of it in less than 3 years. Why? Because Susan had a gambling problem. A serious one. While I thought she was visiting her sister in Kansas City on weekends, she was actually driving to the casinos on the Kansas state line, Harrah's, Argosy, the Isle. She'd sit at the blackjack tables or feed $20 bills into slot machines hour after hour. She was chasing something, maybe the high, maybe a big win that would fix everything, I don't know. But whatever she was chasing, it was destroying her. By the time I met her, she was already in trouble. By 2015, she was drowning. Credit cards maxed out. Personal loans from those predatory lenders that charge 20% interest. She was working part-time at the county library, making $10 an hour. There was no way she could dig herself out. She needed money. A lot of it. And that's when she looked around at the people in her life and decided to target my husband. Now, I need to be clear about something. What Susan did was calculated and deliberate. But Richard made his own choices. Nobody forced him. He was a grown man, 57 years old, and he knew right from wrong. He chose wrong. Again and again and again. I don't know exactly when the affair started. Richard claimed later it was only about 6 months before I found out. Susan told the private investigator it had been nearly 2 years. Somebody was lying, probably both of them. What I do know is that at some point, my husband started meeting Susan at a motel, the Gateway Inn, out on Highway 63 between our town and Jefferson City. It's one of those places that charges by the hour if you want. Truckers stay there. People having affairs stay there. I'd driven past it 1,000 times and never given it a second thought. They'd meet there on weekday afternoons when Richard told me he was meeting with clients. They'd meet there on Saturday mornings when he said he was playing golf. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way he started paying more attention to his appearance. New cologne, nicer shirts. The way he'd suddenly gotten interested in his phone, checking it constantly, taking calls in the other room. The way he'd become distant in bed, like his mind was somewhere else. But at the time, I just thought he was getting older, maybe going through some kind of midlife thing. I didn't suspect an affair. Why would I? We'd been married 35 years. We had grandkids. We were supposed to be past all that. But an affair was only part of it. The affair was just the setup for the real crime. Somewhere along the way, and again, I don't know exactly when Susan convinced Richard to help her with her money problems. She told him her mother was sick with cancer and needed expensive treatment that Medicare wouldn't cover. She said she needed about $50,000. Richard believed her. Or he wanted to believe her. Or maybe he was just so tangled up in the affair that he couldn't think straight. Regardless, he decided to help her. And here's where it gets really bad. He decided to help her by secretly taking out a loan against our house. Our paid-off, free and clear house. In Missouri, when you've got a jointly owned property, when both names are on the deed, you typically need both signatures to take out a home equity line of credit. But Richard found a way around that. He had me sign some papers he claimed were for updating our homeowner's insurance. I signed them without reading carefully because I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. And as it turned out, buried in those pages were authorization forms that he used to open a home equity line of credit. He took out $150,000. And he gave it to Susan. When that wasn't enough, because of course it wasn't enough. Because she was gambling it away as fast as he gave it to her, he went back and increased the credit line. He forged my signature on the second set of documents. He took out another $100,000. And he gave that to Susan, too. $250,000. Our entire retirement security, our safety net, the legacy we were supposed to leave our kids, gone. And I didn't know a thing about it. Now, you might be wondering how I didn't notice. How could he make payments on a loan that large without me seeing it on our bank statements? The answer is simple. He paid it out of his business account, the one I rarely looked at because it was his, money from work bonuses and occasional consulting fees. He told me he was investing it, saving it for our retirement. Meanwhile, he was using it to cover minimum payments on a loan I didn't even know existed. It all came crashing down on a Thursday afternoon in March, 3 years ago. I remember everything about that day. It was cold, one of those gray, raw days where winter just won't let go. I was in the kitchen making beef stew, Richard's favorite, when I got the mail. Most of it was junk credit card offers, grocery store circulars, but there was one official-looking envelope from the county clerk's office. I almost threw it away. I figured it was something about trash pickup schedules or a notice about road construction. But something made me open it. Maybe God was looking out for me. I don't know. It was a notice about a tax lien on our property. According to this letter, we were behind on payments on a home equity line of credit, and the lender, some bank I'd never heard of, had filed a lien against our house. I read it 3 times. My hands started shaking. This couldn't be right. We didn't have a home equity line of credit. We'd paid off our mortgage 15 years ago. This had to be some kind of mistake, identity theft, maybe, or a clerical error. I called Richard at work. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely speak. "Richard, I need you to come home right now." I could hear the noise of the warehouse behind him, the forklift beeping, men shouting orders. "Honey, I'm right in the middle of inventory. Can this wait until tonight?" "No, it cannot wait. We need to talk about this letter I just got from the county." There was a pause, a long pause. In that silence, I heard the truth before he said a word. "What letter?" His voice had changed. It sounded smaller, guilty. "The one about the lien on our house, Richard. The home equity loan I never knew we had." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll be home in 20 minutes. I sat at the kitchen table holding that letter, and I felt this cold, sick weight settling into my stomach. In 20 minutes, my entire life was going to change. I didn't know how yet, but I knew. You know how sometimes you just know? When Richard came through the door, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in 20 minutes. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He sat down across from me, and he couldn't look me in the eye. "Tell me this is a mistake," I said. My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. He put his head in his hands. "I need you to let me explain." "Explain what? Explain why there's a lien on our house? Explain a loan I never agreed to?" And then he told me. Or rather, he tried to tell me a version of the truth that would make him look less terrible. He said he'd refinance the house with my knowledge, which was a lie. He said he'd needed my signature on some documents, and I'd signed them, which was partially true, except he'd lied about what they were for. He said it was for a good reason, to help someone in need. "Who, Richard? Who did you help?" He couldn't answer. He just sat there. "Richard, where did the money go?" Finally, barely whispering. Susan needed help. The kitchen started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table. "Susan? What are you talking about?" And then it came out. The sob story about her mother having cancer, the experimental treatments, how Susan had come to him crying, desperate, saying she had nowhere else to turn. How he'd felt sorry for her. How he'd decided to take out a home equity line of credit, just $50,000 at first, to help her. How Susan had come back 6 months later, saying she needed more. How he'd increased the line of credit to $250,000 total. $250,000 of our money, given to another woman, without telling me. I couldn't breathe. "You gave Susan $250,000? Our money? The equity in our house?" "She was going to pay it back," he said weakly. "She promised." "Pay it back?" "Richard, she works part-time at the library. How was she supposed to pay back $250,000? That's when I saw something in his face. Something beyond guilt. Something that made my blood turn to ice. "Richard," my voice was very quiet now, "are you having an affair with Susan?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I stood up. My chair fell over backward with a crash, but I didn't care. "Get out. Honey, please, it's not what you think. Get out of this house. Right now." "Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You mortgaged our home that we paid off together, that we worked for our entire adult lives, and you gave the money to another woman, a woman you're sleeping with. Get out." He left. He grabbed his keys and his jacket and he left. And I stood there in my kitchen, the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals for him, where I'd packed lunches for our kids, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, and ordinary Tuesday nights, and I felt like the floor had disappeared underneath me. But I wasn't done discovering the truth. Not even close. The next morning, I called a lawyer, a good one, referred by my son who works for a company in Kansas City and knows people. The lawyer's name was Margaret Chen, and she was a tiny woman, maybe 5 feet tall. But she had this quiet fierceness about her that made me feel safe for the first time in 24 hours. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. And when I was done, she looked at me very seriously and said, "I need you to do 2 things. First, go through every piece of paper in your husband's office. Every bank statement, every receipt, every scrap. Take pictures of everything with your phone. Second, don't confront him again until I tell you to. Can you do that?" I could. I did. Richard had moved in with his brother in Colombia. The house was empty except for me. So I went into his office, the little spare bedroom where he kept his desk and filing cabinets, and I started digging. What I found made me physically sick. Hotel receipts. Dozens of them. The Gateway Inn. Over and over. Some dated back almost 2 years. So Susan's story about it being only 6 months was definitely a lie. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals. Thousands of dollars over the past 18 months, money I'd never seen. Credit card statements I didn't recognize, cards Richard had opened without telling me maxed out and showing minimum payments. And hidden in the back of his filing cabinet, a burner phone. I turned it on. It was full of text messages between Richard and Susan. I'm not going to repeat what they said. Some things you can't unhear, can't unsee. But they confirmed everything. The affair, the money. And something else, something that made me realize Susan was even worse than I'd thought. The text messages showed that Susan had been manipulating Richard from the beginning. She'd seduced him deliberately. She'd lied about her mother's cancer. There was no cancer, no sick mother. She'd used the money for gambling debts. And when the money ran out, she'd pressured him for more, threatening to tell me about the affair if he didn't help her. My lawyer's advice: hire a private investigator. Within a week, the investigator came back with a full report. Susan's mother had died in 2008, 11 years earlier. There had been no cancer, no experimental treatments, no medical crisis. Susan had been frequenting 3 different casinos, sometimes twice a week, for years. She'd run up over $200,000 in gambling debts, credit cards, personal loans, even some sketchy online lending services. She'd been in danger of losing her rental house, being sued by creditors, possibly even facing criminal charges for bouncing checks. The money Richard gave her hadn't fixed her problems. She'd used it to pay off the most urgent debts, then gambled away the rest. She was still broke, still desperate, still in debt up to her eyeballs. Armed with this information, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I confronted Susan myself. I drove to her little rental house on Maple Street, the house I'd been to dozens of times for coffee, where we'd sat at her kitchen table talking about our lives, our hopes, our fears. I banged on her door at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. She opened the door in a bathrobe, and the second she saw my face, she knew. "How could you?" I asked. I wasn't yelling. My voice was so quiet it scared even me. "How could you do this to me? I was your friend, Susan. I was there for you." She tried to lie at first. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I know about the affair. I know about the money. I know about the gambling, Susan. I know your mother died 11 years ago. I know everything." She started crying then, real tears streaming down her face. "I'm sick," she sobbed. "I have a problem. I need help." "You need help?" "I needed help, Susan. I needed a friend. Instead, I got someone who seduced my husband and stole my life savings. He wanted to help me. He wanted to sleep with you. And you used that. You manipulated him. You lied to him. You lied to me." "I was going to pay you back." "With what, Susan? You gambled it all away. Every penny. You destroyed my marriage. You stole my home. You betrayed every moment of friendship we ever had. And for what? So you could feed money into slot machines." She couldn't answer. She just stood there crying. And that's when I realized something. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she got caught. There's a big difference. I turned around and walked away. That was the last time I ever spoke to her. The next few months were brutal. The divorce proceedings, the depositions, having to sit in a lawyer's office and answer questions about my sex life, about whether I'd neglected my husband's needs, about whether I'd been controlling with money, having to prove that no, I hadn't known about the loans, that yes, my husband had forged my signature in some cases and tricked me into signing in others. But the legal battle wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was living in a small town where everyone knew, where I couldn't go to the grocery store without people either giving me pitying looks or avoiding eye contact entirely, where I'd see people from church who'd take my hand and say, "We're praying for you," with this sorrowful tone, like I was dying. Some people took Richard's side. A few of his old buddies suggested maybe I was partly to blame, that maybe I hadn't been paying enough attention to my marriage. As if 35 years of loyalty, of cooking his meals and raising his children and supporting his career, wasn't enough attention. As if his decision to lie and cheat and steal was somehow my fault. That hurt worse than almost anything. To be blamed for someone else's betrayal. To have people suggest that if I'd just been a better wife, maybe my husband wouldn't have needed to mortgage our house and sleep with another woman. But most people were on my side. My pastor, Reverend Williams, called me personally. He said, "What happened to you is not your fault, and I want you to know this church stands with you." Several women from the ladies' auxiliary showed up at my door with casseroles and brownies and hugs. My neighbor, Janet, who I'd known for 20 years, came over and sat with me and let me cry on her shoulder. And my children, oh, my children. They were furious with their father, absolutely furious. My oldest, David, who's 36 and has 2 kids of his own, told Richard, "You're dead to me." Just like that, cold and final. My daughter, Michelle, who's 34, stopped speaking to him entirely. Wouldn't answer his calls. Wouldn't read his texts. My youngest, Sarah, who'd always been Daddy's little girl, told him, "I'm ashamed to be your daughter." She was crying when she said it, which made it even more devastating. Watching Richard realize what his choices had cost him, that might have been the only satisfaction in this whole nightmare. He lost his wife. He lost his children. He lost his standing in the community. And he did it to himself. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I found that letter. Margaret Chen, my lawyer, was incredible. She argued that Richard had committed fraud, forging my signature, deceiving me about the nature of documents I'd signed, stealing marital assets for personal use. The judge agreed. I got the house. Or rather, I got what was left of it after we settled with the bank. We had to refinance to pay off part of the fraudulent loan. I'm still paying that mortgage, actually, and I'm 62 years old, which is not how I thought my retirement would look. But I got the house. I also got 60% of Richard's retirement account, half his pension, and monthly alimony of $2,000. Plus, he has to maintain life insurance with me as the beneficiary. Richard had to take early retirement. He moved to Jefferson City, about 40 miles away, and last I heard he's working part-time at a Lowe's, trying to rebuild some kind of life. Our kids still don't speak to him. He's missed birthdays, holidays, his grandchildren's school plays, and soccer games. He made his choices. As for Susan, my lawyer filed a civil suit against her for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She tried to fight it at first, but she had no money for a good lawyer. Eventually, she filed for bankruptcy. We fought that too. You can't discharge debts related to fraud through bankruptcy, but in the end, she lost everything anyway. She lost her rental house, got evicted. The library fired her once everything came out. The church asked her to find another congregation. She became a pariah in our town, just like she'd made me feel in those early days after the truth came out. Eventually, she moved away. I heard through the grapevine that she went to Oklahoma to live with some relative. I don't know if she ever got help for her gambling problem. I don't spend much time thinking about her anymore. She's not worth the energy. But I want to be honest with you about something. For a long time, months, maybe close to a year, I was a mess. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, my heart racing, replaying everything in my mind, all the signs I'd missed. All the times I'd trusted when I should have questioned. All the years I'd spent building a life that turned out to be built on sand. I questioned everything about myself. Had I been stupid, naive, blind? Had I ignored warning signs because I was too comfortable, too complacent? Should I have known? I went to therapy. My doctor recommended someone, and at first I resisted. I'm from a generation where you don't really talk about seeing a therapist. You handle your problems yourself. But I was drowning, and I needed help, so I went. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Harrison, told me something that changed my perspective. She said, "You keep asking yourself how you didn't see this coming, as if it was your job to police your husband's morals. But here's the truth. You trusted him because that's what marriage is supposed to be. Trust. You trusted him because he'd given you no reason not to for 35 years. You trusted him because you're a trustworthy person who assumes others are too. That's not a weakness. That's not stupidity. That's called being a decent human being." It took a long time for me to believe that, but eventually I did. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my daughter Michelle came to visit. We were sitting on my front porch, the same porch where Richard and I used to sit on summer evenings, drinking iced tea and watching the sun go down. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something." I looked at her, worried. "What is it, honey?" "I'm proud of you." I was surprised. "Proud? Why?" "Because you didn't let them destroy you. You could have fallen apart. You could have blamed yourself, could have curled up and given up. But instead, you fought. You protected yourself. You stood up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. You showed me what real strength looks like." I started crying then. Not sad tears, different tears. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. She was right. I had fought. I'd hired a good lawyer. I'd documented everything. I'd stood up in court and told the truth. I'd held Richard and Susan accountable for what they'd done. I hadn't let them make me the villain in my own story. And here's what I've learned over these past 3 years. People will disappoint you. Sometimes, the people you trust most will hurt you worst. But that doesn't mean you were wrong to trust them. It means they were wrong to abuse your trust. There's a big difference. I'm 62 years old now. I still live in that same house, the house I almost lost. I had to take out a mortgage to keep it, and I'll probably be paying it off until I'm 70, but it's still mine. My kids visit often. David and his family are coming for Thanksgiving. Michelle usually comes once a month, and Sarah FaceTimes me twice a week. My grandchildren play in the same backyard where their parents grew up. I have good friends now. Real friends. Women from church who've proven themselves over and over. Janet next door, who checks on me and invites me to dinner. Carol from my old job, who took me out for my birthday and made me laugh so hard I cried. These are the people who showed up when it mattered. Sometimes people ask me if I'm bitter. The answer is no. I'm not bitter. I'm sadder. I'm wiser. I'm more careful. But I'm not bitter. What Richard and Susan did says everything about who they are and nothing about who I am. I was a good wife. I was a good friend. I worked hard. I was loyal. I tried to do the right thing. The fact that they chose to betray that isn't a reflection of my worth. It's a reflection of their character. I've also learned something about forgiveness. People tell me I should forgive Richard, that holding on to anger isn't healthy, and they're probably right about the anger part. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean allowing someone back into your life who's proven they can't be trusted. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. I've forgiven Richard in the sense that I don't wish him harm. I hope he's learned from his mistakes. I hope he becomes a better person. But I never want to speak to him again. Forgiveness and boundaries can coexist. You can let go of anger while still protecting yourself from people who've hurt you. Last month, something happened that I never thought would happen. I went on a date. A widower I met through Janet. His name is Tom. He's 65, and his wife died of breast cancer 4 years ago. We met for dinner at the Plaza Diner, same place where I first had lunch with Susan, which felt strange, but also somehow right, like I was reclaiming that space. Tom was kind. He asked about my life, my kids, my interests, He told me about his late wife, about how much he missed her, but how lonely it got living in an empty house. We talked for 3 hours. At the end of the night, he walked me to my car, an old Honda Civic. Nothing fancy, but it's paid off and it runs. And he asked if he could see me again. I said yes. I don't know where it'll go. Maybe nowhere. Maybe somewhere wonderful. But the point is, I'm open to it. I'm not closed off. I'm not afraid. Richard and Susan tried to break me, but I'm still here, still standing, still capable of hope. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Betrayal is devastating, but it's not fatal. You can survive it. You can heal from it. You can even, eventually, thrive after it. But only if you refuse to let the betrayers win. Only if you fight for yourself, for your dignity, for your future. Stand up, protect yourself, document everything, get a good lawyer, hold people accountable. And don't let anyone, not your spouse, not your friends, not people in your community make you feel like you're being vindictive or unreasonable for demanding justice. You deserve better than people who lie to you, steal from you, and betray your trust. And then, when the dust settles, build a life so good that looking back becomes unnecessary. I'm 62 years old, and I'm still here, still in my house, still surrounded by people who love me, real love, not the fake kind that comes with strings attached. I have my children, my grandchildren, my friends. I have my painting class on Tuesday mornings at the senior center. I'm terrible at it, but it makes me happy. I have my book club. I have quiet mornings with coffee on my front porch and loud dinners when the family comes over. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything, but I was wrong. I'd only lost people who didn't deserve me, and in losing them, I found myself again. The strong woman I'd always been but had somehow forgotten. The woman who wouldn't accept betrayal, who knew her worth, who wouldn't settle for less than she deserved. This is my second act, and I'm making it count. If you're going through something like this right now, if someone you trusted has betrayed you, if you're feeling lost and broken and like you'll never recover, please hear me. You're stronger than you think. You deserve better, and you will get through this. It won't be easy. It won't be quick, but you will survive. And on the other side, you'll find a version of yourself you didn't even know existed. Stronger, wiser, more careful, yes, but also more grateful for the real love you do have. Stand up, fight back, and then build something beautiful from the ashes. That's what I did, and I've never been more at peace. Thank you for listening to my story.
All right, let's talk about what we just heard. A woman in her 60s, married for 35 years, living in a small Missouri town, thought she had her life figured out. Paid off house, grown kids, decent retirement ahead. And then one Thursday afternoon, a letter from the county clerk shows up in her mailbox and her entire world explodes. Her husband had secretly mortgaged their home, the home they'd paid off 15 years earlier, and handed $250,000 to a woman from church he was sleeping with. And that woman? She gambled every penny away at casinos while pretending her mother had cancer. If that doesn't make your blood boil, check your pulse. But here's what I want you to understand. This didn't happen because she was stupid or naive. This happened because two people she trusted made deliberate, calculated decisions to betray her. And that distinction matters more than anything else I'm going to say today. Let's start with the psychology here, because there's a masterclass in manipulation buried in this story. Susan, the so-called friend, didn't just stumble into this woman's life. She positioned herself strategically. She showed up at church alone, played the vulnerable divorcee, let people feel sorry for her. That's step one of a con. Make yourself sympathetic. Make people want to help you. Our protagonist saw someone who looked lost and lonely and did what good people do. She reached out. She invited Susan to lunch. She became her friend. And for 15 years, Susan built that friendship, brick by brick. Investing in trust she planned to cash out later. Think about the timing. Susan waited years before she made her move. She was there for the hard moments when this woman's mother died, when the family went through struggles. She was patient, and patience is the hallmark of a long con. By the time Susan needed money, she wasn't asking a casual acquaintance. She was asking someone who felt deeply indebted to her, someone who'd seen her as a loyal friend through thick and thin. That's calculated. That's not desperation, that's strategy. And Richard, the husband. Let's be clear about his role here. He didn't get tricked. He didn't fall victim to some femme fatale. He's a grown man in his late 50s who decided his marriage vows, his family's security, and basic human decency were all negotiable. Susan may have initiated the affair, but Richard chose to participate. He chose to lie. He chose to forge his wife's signature. He chose to hand over $250,000 of marital assets to his mistress. Those were his decisions. Every single one. You don't get to blame the other woman when you're the one who took out the loan, signed the papers, and showed up at that motel week after week. He didn't lose his family. He sold it, piece by piece, for an affair and whatever ego boost he got from playing the hero to a woman in distress. Now let's follow the money, because that's where the real crime happened. This wasn't just an affair. Affairs are bad enough. They're betrayals of intimacy and trust. But this was financial abuse on a massive scale. Richard took a house that was completely paid off, $300,000 in equity, probably more, and turned it back into debt. He did this without his wife's knowledge or genuine consent. That's theft. I don't care that his name was on the deed too. Half that equity was hers. They'd worked together for decades to pay off that mortgage. And he unilaterally decided to risk it all. And here's the thing about power in a marriage. It often comes down to who controls the information. Richard handled the property taxes and homeowners insurance. That gave him the opening he needed. He could hide the loan payments in his business account. He could intercept mail about the refinancing. He could maintain the illusion that everything was fine while he was systematically draining their retirement security. She trusted the division of labor they'd agreed on, and he weaponized that trust. Susan understood power too. She had power over Richard through the affair, the power to expose him, to destroy his marriage and his reputation in their small town. She used that leverage to squeeze more and more money out of him. First $50,000, then $150,000, then $250,000. She kept coming back because she knew he was trapped. He couldn't say no without risking exposure. That's extortion dressed up as a relationship. And let's be honest about what that money represented. That wasn't just numbers on a page. That was 35 years of work. That was scrimping and saving and making sacrifices to build security. That was supposed to be their cushion in retirement, their legacy to their kids, their safety net if something went wrong. And these two people looked at all of that and saw an ATM machine for an affair and a gambling addiction. They weren't just betraying her emotionally, they were stealing her future. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and this isn't legal advice. Anyone dealing with anything like this needs to talk to a real attorney in their own state, because laws vary and your specific situation matters. But let me tell you what this woman did right once she found out, because she handled this almost perfectly from a self-protection standpoint. First, she documented everything. She went through every paper in that home office. She took pictures, she found hotel receipts, bank statements, the burner phone. She built a case before she made her next move. That's crucial. In situations like this, evidence is everything. You can't just rely on your memory or what someone admits to in the heat of the moment. You need proof. Second, she got a lawyer immediately. Not after trying to work it out, not after giving Richard more chances to explain. The morning after that confrontation, she was on the phone with an attorney. And she got a good one, someone who understood fraud and asset protection. That lawyer told her to keep gathering evidence and not to confront Susan until they had a strategy. That's smart. Anger makes you want to confront people, to scream, to demand answers. But that tips your hand. It gives them time to hide assets, delete messages, coordinate their stories. Third, she involved professionals beyond just the lawyer. She hired a private investigator who uncovered the gambling addiction, the casino visits, the lies about the sick mother. She followed legal procedures. She filed for divorce with fraud allegations. She pursued a civil case against Susan. She did this by the book, which meant she won. The judge saw through Richard's excuses and awarded her the house, most of his retirement, alimony, everything. Could she have seen this coming earlier? Maybe. There were signs Richard's increased attention to his appearance, the phone behavior, the distance in their marriage. But here's what I want to be very clear about. Noticing those signs is easy in hindsight, when you're living it, when you trust someone, when you've been married for 35 years. You don't automatically jump to affair and financial fraud. You think maybe he's stressed at work, maybe he's going through a midlife thing, maybe you're both just getting older and the marriage has settled into a comfortable routine. Trusting your spouse isn't a character flaw. It's what marriage is supposed to be. The failure here is Richard's, not hers. So, what can we learn from this? What should you take away if you're listening to this and thinking about your own life, your own relationships, your own vulnerabilities? First lesson: trust but verify when it comes to your money. I don't care how long you've been married or how much you trust your spouse. You need to know what's happening with jointly owned assets. If both names are on the deed, both of you should see the property tax bills, the insurance statements, anything involving that property. If your spouse handles certain finances, spot check occasionally. It's not about suspicion. It's about being a responsible co-owner of your own life. Second, real friends don't need your money. Be very, very careful when someone in your life starts having financial emergencies that only you can solve, especially if those emergencies get bigger over time, especially if the story keeps changing. Real friends ask for help when they need it, but they don't manipulate you, they don't lie about the reasons, and they don't keep coming back for more when they haven't resolved the underlying problem. Susan's story should have fallen apart the moment she needed a second massive loan. Where did the first one go? Why isn't her mother better if that money paid for treatment? Those questions should have been asked. Third, forgery and deception are crimes, not mistakes. If you discover that your spouse has forged your signature, lied to you to get you to sign documents under false pretenses, or taken out loans using marital property without your knowledge, that's not a rough patch. That's fraud. Treat it like the crime it is. Get a lawyer. Protect yourself. Don't let anyone tell you you're overreacting or being vindictive. You're defending yourself against theft. Fourth, your community's opinion doesn't matter more than your safety and dignity. This woman lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone. She had to face people at church, at the grocery store, at the diner. Some of them judged her. Some of them suggested she was partly to blame. And you know what? She survived that. She held her head up. She let the truth speak for itself. Your reputation is built on your actions, not on whether you stayed married to someone who betrayed you. Anyone who thinks you should have tried harder to save a marriage where your spouse forged your signature and stole your retirement doesn't have your best interests at heart. Fifth, and this is important, betrayal is a choice the betrayer makes. It's not caused by the victim being inattentive or not exciting enough or too controlling or too lenient. Those are excuses. Richard chose to have an affair. He chose to steal marital assets. Susan chose to seduce a married man and lie about her mother's cancer and gamble away money that wasn't hers. Those were deliberate decisions by people who knew better. You can't prevent someone from betraying you if they've decided that's what they're going to do. All you can do is respond appropriately when you find out. And here's the last thing I want you to hear. Life doesn't end when you discover betrayal. This woman is 62. She's rebuilding. She's got her house, her kids, her grandkids, real friends, and she even went on a date with a decent man who treated her with respect. She didn't curl up and die. She didn't let Richard and Susan destroy her capacity for joy and hope. That's not weakness. That's not denial. That's strength. That's resilience. That's refusing to let the worst thing that ever happened to you become the only thing that defines you. If you're going through something like this, I know it feels like the end of the world. It feels like you'll never trust anyone again, never feel safe again, never be happy again. But you will. It takes time. It takes help, therapy, lawyers, good friends, maybe all three. It takes making hard decisions and standing up for yourself, even when it's scary. But you will get through it. And on the other side, you'll be someone who knows their worth, who doesn't settle, who can spot the red flags, who protects what's theirs. That's a hard-won kind of wisdom, but it's real, and it's worth fighting for. This woman's story isn't over. Neither is yours. Remember that.